Hello, friends. Today we will look at some true stories. The first one is about two friends who were on vacation in France and never forgot what they saw there. So let's begin. Sophie and Max were enjoying their summer vacation in Paris, France. They explored the City of Love, visited the famous Eiffel Tower, and indulged in French pastries. However, the fun came to a screeching halt when they got stuck in an old rickety elevator in their hotel. The elevator jolted and groaned, causing Sophie to grip Max's hand tightly. They both looked up to the flickering light above in dread, wondering how long they would be stuck in there. Suddenly, the elevator jerked violently, causing Sophie to stumble and hit her head on the wall. When she opened her eyes, she found that the elevator had descended into a dark and dingy basement. The musty air filled their noses, and they noticed a strange smell that made their stomachs turn. Fear took hold of them, wondering if anyone would find them in this abandoned area. That's when they heard something scratch at the door. It sounded like long, sharp nails. Sophie and Max's heartbeats quickened as they realized that they were not alone down here. They huddled in the corner and prayed that whatever was out there couldn't find a way in. A few minutes of deafening silence followed before they heard the scratching sound again. It grew louder and more agitated. Suddenly, the door shook and rattled as if something was trying to force its way in. Sophie and Max screamed and pushed themselves further into the corner. They caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure outside, with glowing red eyes staring back at them. The creature let out a terrifying screech and clawed at the door relentlessly. Sophie and Max knew it was only a matter of time before it would break through. As the creature continued to assault the door, Sophie and Max searched for a way to escape. They spotted a small hatch above them and scrambled to reach it. With the creature still clawing at the door, they managed to pry open the hatch and hoist themselves through. Sophie and Max stumbled up the stairs, gasping for air and crying in terror. They burst out of the old elevator and into the hotel lobby, where they found the stunned receptionist staring at their disheveled appearance. They could barely explain what had happened and only begged the man to call the police. When the police came, they searched the basement but found no trace of the creature or any evidence of what Sophie and Max had seen. Despite this, neither of them ever forgot what they saw that night and made sure to avoid any strange elevators in the future. I hope you liked the first story. The second true story is about friends returning from their night trip and seeing something in the woods that shouldn't be there. It was late at night, and the friends were driving back from their weekend trip. The moon was hidden behind the dark clouds that hung heavily in the sky. The only light guiding their way was from the headlights of their car. As they drove on, they suddenly found themselves entering into a dense forest. The forest was eerily quiet. The only sound that could be heard was the sound of their car engine. The trees loomed overhead, making the forest seem even darker and more ominous. The friends were all feeling a growing sense of unease. Suddenly, the car encountered a flat tire and they were forced to stop. The friends got out to assess the damage and began to look for a spare wheel. As they rummaged through their trunk, they heard a faint rustling sound coming from the forest. They all froze and listened intently, but the sound went silent. The friends decided to dismiss it as nothing and went back to work on fixing the tire. However, as they were working, they heard the sound again, this time much closer. They all stood still, looking toward the source of the sound. To their surprise, they saw something moving between the trees. The friends couldn't quite make out what it was, but it appeared to be lurking in the darkness, watching them. They quickly became terrified and decided they had to leave right away. As they got back into the car, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the woods. They quickly turned the key in ignition, and their car roared to life. They sped off faster than they ever had before, almost hitting several trees on the winding road. They dared not look behind them, afraid of what they might see. The friends were sure that they had encountered something not of this world, and had left it far behind in the forest. But deep down, they couldn't quite shake the feeling that the darkness and terror was not yet gone. Shocking, but not as much as the next story about a woman who lost her husband, but probably didn't really lose him. Mary was a young pregnant woman living alone in a creaky old house on the outskirts of a small town. Her husband had passed away in a car accident a few months ago, leaving her alone and scared. She had always been a superstitious person, but ever since his death, she was terrified of the dark and the shadows that lurked in the corners of her home. One dark and stormy night, Mary woke up to a strange noise coming from the hallway. She rubbed her eyes and strained to hear where the noise was coming from. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice calling out her name. It was her dead husband's voice, echoing through the empty halls. Frozen with fear, Mary hesitated before slowly making her way to the hallway, where she saw a dark figure standing in the shadows. She tried to scream, but her voice was stuck in her throat. As she got closer, she could make out the figure's features. It was her husband's ghost, haunting her at night. The ghostly figure stared at her with hollow eyes, and as Mary tried to run away from him, she felt a cold breeze pass through her body, sending shivers down her spine. She knew her husband was gone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still with her, watching her from the shadows. Ever since that night, Mary's fear grew worse and worse. She could barely sleep, and she always felt like someone was watching her. She never spoke to anyone about the ghostly figure lurking in her home, but she knew in her heart that her husband was still with her, even after death. Mary found herself lost in the middle of the forest as the sun began to set. She had been out for a walk and had gone further than she intended. She tried retracing her steps but could not find the path back. Panic set in as she realized she was alone and lost in the wilderness. Exhausted and afraid, Mary sat down under a tree and started to cry. As she was crying, she heard rustling in the bushes behind her. She turned around to see what it was and found a beautiful deer standing a few feet away from her. The deer looked at Mary, and for a moment, they locked eyes. Mary felt a sense of calm wash over her. The deer then turned and started walking in the opposite direction. Mary felt drawn to follow it, as if it was leading her somewhere. She decided to take a leap of faith and follow the deer. The deer led Mary to a small clearing where she found an old cabin. The cabin looked abandoned, but when Mary knocked on the door, she was surprised to find an old man inside. He welcomed Mary in and offered her food and a warm place to stay for the night. It turned out that the man was a wise old hermit who had been living in the wilderness for years. He shared stories of his adventures and taught Mary how to survive in the wild. Mary spent several days with the hermit, learning new skills and gaining the confidence to explore the wilderness. When she felt ready, the hermit showed Mary the path leading out of the forest. Mary thanked the hermit for his hospitality and headed back home. She had come to the forest seeking solitude, but she left with so much more. Mary learned to trust her instincts and gained a new appreciation for the outdoors. It was a journey that would stay with her for the rest of her life. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you enjoyed. Leave a like so we can tell more true stories like this. See you soon.